this kind of cycle of firing people when things don't go your way is, I think, it's just another sign of the accelerating decay of a government. When it starts, it's a clear sign of a government that has just simply lost the plot. That's why you have to do a bit of a double take when you're hearing Lisa Nandy there. I mean, she was asked again in another interview to sort of rate the cabinet on a scale of 1 to 10, or how proud she is to be in it. And she was saying, like, what's below 1? You know, this is somebody who pretty much is in semi-open defiance against Keir Starmer. Now, this is the problem. It's funny that the Tory sort of set what now turns out to be a template of political self-destruction. You know, you make a botched leadership attempt that you talk about who's going to be, you involve yourself in this psychodrama. I mean, the vote for Keir Starmer was to a large extent a vote against the kind of psychodrama that the Tories descended into. Their whole pitch was that we're going to be sensible, we're going to be grown-ups, we're going to govern on a way that we're not trying to stab each other the whole time. And now, by surviving the sort of botched coup attempt earlier on this week, Keir Starmer is going to be in a never-ending cycle of reprisals. So it won't be long until we get somebody popping up attacking Lisa Nandy for saying what she's saying. And this is going to go on for quite some time.
Sonia, the fact that they've sort of launched straight into the Matthew Doyle peerage scandal, just as they began to, I mean, not they're ever going to emerge from it, but sort of begin to be clawing their way almost out of the Peter Mandelson scandal. You know, Matthew Doyle, who got a peerage despite his links with a paedophile. I mean, it means the sort of the mini honeymoon for Keir Starmer after surviving an Sawa. It really wasn't very long, was it?
No, and I do think honeymoon was a bit of a stretch, Hugo, to describe those few hours. I mean, it was inevitable that the Matthew Doyle elevation to the Lords was going to blow up. I remember reading that story straight after Christmas. It was broken by the Sunday Times. And thinking, this is huge, because it speaks to that same failure of judgment that we saw in the appointment of Mandelson. And it really undercuts... So the issue for Labour, I think, is that Keir Starmer came to power telling the country that he was different from the last lot and he was going to clean up politics and fix it all. And I really think the Matthew Doyle sort of issue gets to the heart of what the problem is, which is it's all very well and good to tell voters that, but ultimately when it comes to doling out peerages like sweeties to mates who've been loyal to you, and let's not forget we're talking here about seats in Parliament for life, it's loyalty to friends that seems to come above a really thorough assessment of someone's record and whether they are suitable for that kind of elevation. And let's not forget with Matthew Doyle, the issue was that he went and campaigned. He asked voters to vote for a man who had been charged with child sex offences and later went on to be convicted for them. So if you're a voter sitting there listening to this, you're saying possibly to yourself, well, okay, Keir Starmer says, you know, they're cleaner than clean, they're better than the last lot. But at the end of the day, they're putting people like this in the Lords for life. You know, that just doesn't add up, and I think it's why it's such a big problem for Starmer.
What do you think, Sonia, about the Lisa Nandy sort of the misogyny thing and the idea that Downing Street is a boys' club, that there aren't enough women there, in positions of power? Obviously, you know, there's a lot more women there than there were a couple of weeks ago, at least in senior roles now. You've got Harriet Harman saying that Keir Starmer should appoint a de facto woman deputy, that kind of thing. Would that make any difference to these kinds of stories? Do basically people who are friends with paedophiles get appointed to roles because there aren't enough women around?
So I definitely think Labour's got an issue with women. You know, the fact that it's never had a permanent female leader, for example. I used to work in the Labour Party sort of around 15 years ago. I wrote about the women issues that I thought the party had back then. It doesn't sound like much has changed. I think Lisa Nandy's complaints sound incredibly legitimate and really worrying, quite frankly. And we can see it ourselves as journalists in the nature of some of the briefing that comes out. However, I'm very sceptical of things like, you know, Harriet Harman's pitch that let's give a woman in the cabinet a very important title and maybe that will solve our women issues. I think voters are a little bit more discerning than that. And I think Labour has actually got a woman issue of substance. For example, we had an incredibly important judgment from the Supreme Court last year, which clarified women's existing legal protections to single-sex services. And we're talking about things like changing rooms at work where female nurses are getting undressed, female survivors of sexual assault being able to access genuinely single-sex services in their local area. Supreme Court made this very important clarification of law. Is Labour enforcing it properly? absolutely not. They're sitting on guidance that would help service providers implement the law, because I think personally, because it's a bit politically tricky for them, because gender and sex is such a contested issue. Again, like the Matthew Doyle appointment, that speaks to Labour's problem, which is that when it's about doing your mates a favour, or when it's about trying to keep things calm in the party as opposed to doing the right thing, I'm afraid they seem to take the easy way out. They're not prepared to take the tough calls when it comes to women and women's rights.
Well, look, I mean, linked to this, I suppose, the head of the civil service, Sir Chris Wormald, is understood to be negotiating an exit package from his job, can announce his departure as soon as today. It has been widely reported that Keir Starmer is going to appoint Dame Antonia Romero to replace him. She'd be the first female cabinet secretary. But concerns have already been raised about that decision. She was investigated for allegations of bullying, harassment and misusing expenses while at the Foreign Office in 2017. Here's Lord MacDonald, Simon MacDonald, who was in charge of the Foreign Office at the time, speaking to Channel 4.
I would prefer to go into detail with the team in number 10 rather than your viewership, but yes, I am available to talk about that and would like to do that. Sometimes appealing through the media is more effective than doing it direct, which I've tried to do, but they know how to get hold of me.
Are you saying you've tried to warn them?
I'm saying I've tried. I've been in touch today and not had a response.
Fraser, it's one thing to get embroiled in a scandal about someone you've just appointed. It's quite another thing to get embroiled in a scandal about someone you haven't even appointed yet.
Yes, but let's remember this is Simon MacDonald, who we just heard from. An attack from him is really quite a compliment. I mean, he is one of the worst permanent secretaries ever to come out of the government. He's notorious for, for attacking governments. He kind of lost the plot over Brexit a bit. So I don't think that we should think that Antonia Romero is a suddenly controversial appointment. I mean, she is smart, she is tough, she has been tipped for this top job for a long, long time in a way that Wormald certainly was not. So, I think that... and now, what is unusual is to basically fire a permanent secretary as part of a reshuffle. The whole point of these guys is that they stay between governments, let alone between kind of phases of leadership. Somebody you appoint recently, you shouldn't really be quitting, but the system is not supposed to work like that. That's right. But that isn't to say that Antonia Romero is in any way a bad or a controversial post. To be honest, I would have put her pretty much in the top two candidates to succeed when the time came. I'm surprised she didn't get it last time around.
Do you think we're losing that assumption that that assumption of permanence among permanent secretaries, among civil servants, that assumption of impartiality of the people sort of behind the scenes who aren't elected politicians being this real force for stability who are always there and enact without fear or favour whatever government they're responsible for? Because that was such a core part of the British system, and there seems to have been a massive loss of faith in it in recent years from all sides.
Yes, and I think Boris Johnson started it. He had perhaps the biggest single miscalculation of Johnson was to appoint Dominic Cummings in such a huge position of authority. Now Cummings wanted to get in a new permanent secretary, and that's the way it worked. And ever since then, once you start politicising the role, it's hard to stop. And that's what we've seen meanwhile. But the theme we keep coming back to, though, is politicians kind of blaming the civil service for them not being able to do what they want. Now, the obviously effective ministers managed to make the system work for them. The average standard of quality of senior civil servants is very, very high. They will help you work to the constraints if you're a minister that you've got. But this kind of cycle of firing people when things don't go your way is, I think, it's just another sign of the accelerating decay of a government. When it starts, it's a clear sign of a government that has just simply lost the plot.
Now, while Westminster continues to arm and ar over the future of the Prime Minister, 2 Premier League football managers have been sacked in the space of 2 days for their poor leadership performance. So despite the obvious risks, the production team have decided to make me talk about football. So here to help translate things for me is TalkSport's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook. Hello, Alex.
Good morning.
Thanks for being with us. So look, 2 managers gone, I gather. It says here Thomas Frank at Spurs and Sean Dyche at... Am I saying that right? Dyche?
Yeah, yep. Well, Sean Dyche, but yeah, we'll let you off.
Dyche, that'll do. Sean Dyche at Nottingham Forest. And the turnover in the Premier League is definitely higher than at Westminster. Is it always like this?
I've got to say it's been a particularly crazy start to 2026 when you think Manchester United, Chelsea, Real Madrid, 3 of the biggest clubs in world football have all parted company with their manager. Tottenham following suit this week, and Nottingham Forest actually are looking for their 4th different manager this season. That would be a first in Premier League history. It's quite a lucrative business if you can be a Premier League manager underperform and get yourself a nice payoff.
Okay, Fraser, the big difference is that you can, in football, you can sack the manager and then find a replacement, at your leisure or immediately. Would that work in politics?
Well, I mean, look, it shouldn't work in politics. You just say with what you've got. But we can see politics and football are suffering from the same kind of malaise now. Social media escalates things. If something's going wrong, very quickly it becomes, let's fire the guy in charge. This is a crisis. So you end up with Nottingham Forest about to be on 4 managers in one season, which I think is unprecedented in the history of football. We've just been talking about, Keir Starmer firing permanent secretaries, things that should last or not. Now, I think that what social media does is exacerbate the feeling of crisis. Mm-hmm. When we get a 0-0 draw, when the match with the politics, whatever it is, going through a rough patch, things are far more likely to escalate now into, in that case, you need to fire the guy in charge. Now, we just simply didn't do that back in the day. And I think that boards are panicking now, and I think they have yet to adjust to the era where they're going to get a lot more incoming. They're going to let more people telling them, look, you're a director, you've got to move this guy along. I can't think of many good politicians, managers, or anywhere who don't go through rough patches and should usually be supported to get through them.
Alex, it's very results-based when managers get the boot, right?
Yeah, that's obviously the main criteria is delivering results. Sometimes there can be personality clashes. In the case of Enzo Maresca at Chelsea, results were okay. He just won the inaugural World Club Cup, so they were world champions 1 minute and he was sacked the next. But that's because he dared to call out the ownership in a press conference, and Ruben Amorim at Manchester United followed suit. So that was a bit more than just results based.
Sonia, do you look at the speed with which football clubs can do this stuff and sort of, map it onto politics with maybe some envy?
I think envy would be the wrong word. I think the thing about the Keir Starmer situation, I agree with Fraser that social media does encourage sort of lots of speculation in ways that we might not have seen 20 or 30 years ago. But there wouldn't be this speculation around Starmer if there wasn't an extremely fundamental problem, which is that he's a terrible prime minister and he's doing very, very badly in the polls. So this isn't kind of superficial, maybe he's not working today or in the last month, let's switch him up and try someone new and then maybe try someone else. Labour MPs, the reason why I think this is terminal for Starmer, even though he's bought himself some medium-term stability, is that Labour is in real difficulties if they go into the next election with him, and the reason for that is that he's never, he doesn't connect with voters, and really he hasn't ever connected with voters, because I don't think it was Labour's positive election campaign that won them their massive majority. It was the public being absolutely cheesed off with the Conservatives after 15 years. So the reason why there is all this talk about replacing Keir Starmer, the Mandelson revelations were just kind of like the last straw. He is not a good prime minister. He's not delivering the things in office yet that he would need to deliver in order to win the next election decisively. So I don't think we should skirt over the fact that there are issues of substance here.
Alex, before I let you go, what's the harder job, being prime minister or being the manager of a Premier League football club?
I think being the Prime Minister, to be honest, because football is just a sport. At the end of the day, obviously, government is much more than that. But if you ask me who's under more scrutiny, the Prime Minister or the England football manager, I think certainly come the summer when Thomas Tuchel, who's just been rewarded with a new contract by the FA, is trying to lead England to the World Cup for the first time since 1966. I would argue there's more scrutiny on him than there will be on Sir Keir Starmer. Just a thought for you before I go, and this is a thought I've often had in football. I find it bizarre that these clubs dish out 3, 4, 5-year contracts to managers when the average shelf life of a Premier League manager is less than a year. Same with government in a way. I've always advocated in football that actually club owners should get together and say we're only going to give 1-year rolling contracts. At the end of that 1 year, you're going to be judged on success or failure, whether you get to extend your tenure. And I would be in favour of that when it comes to Prime Ministers as well. I think a year is long enough to judge whether Sir Keir Starmer has done a good job or not.
Brilliant. Alex, thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your expertise. And most of all, thanks for your patience. That is TalkSport's chief football correspondent, Alex Crook, speaking there. And I think this is a good time to bring in this week's column.
And I would strongly recommend Hugo Rifkind in The Times today
Thank you, Jacob Rees-Mogg. I wrote today about why we put up with the endless political churn of scandal, which leads to a sort of seemingly endless revolving door of leaders, of politicians, right, of prime ministers. I write about the way that a child of 10 in the UK today will be living through currently their 6th prime minister, which is the sort of thing we used to, back in the day, laugh at the Italians for, and we just seem to be in love with defenestrating our prime ministers, even though we know how much damage it does to us as a country and to our economy. It's no great secret, and yet we keep doing it. Fraser, why do we?
Well, first of all, we don't do it. The parties defenestrate their own leaders.
We join in.
Do we?
Don't
Who's we here?
Well, we as the media, we don't make it easier.
No, it's not our job to make it easier for politicians.
Yeah.
It's our job to criticise. But the question is, why is there so much churn? I think has got a fundamental reason. The big crisis we're facing right now is state capacity, the ability of governments to carry out what politicians promise. Now, we have let all of these rules and regulations and EU courts and human rights and equality stuff grow like weeds around the feet of politicians. So when they want to do something, build something, change something, they're told, no, you can't, Minister, because this will get challenged in the courts. Anything from welfare reform to HS2 is stopped. Now, they don't realise that because they think these are small things. No, they're big things. So the failure to do the weeding means that they go in opposition. They go, oh, look at the guy. He's so incompetent. If only I was there instead, I'd really do it. I'll give you a classic example. Nigel Farage is saying that right now with reform. Look at these guys. The two parties have failed. We're going to go in there. So reform have now got control of, 10, 12 councils in England. What's happening? Exactly the same thing. They're finding their weeds are growing around their feet. So what's happening is political leaders are not being honest about the limits of their power. They actually can't reform because the human rights laws of disability, recruitment, all the things that were set for good progressive reasons have now gotten so much that you cannot make these basic changes. Politicians don't acknowledge that. Opposition leaders don't acknowledge that. They both have debates on a false premise, and when they get in power, they find that when you pull the lever, nothing happens. That is the problem. It's not who's pulling the lever, it's that the mechanics under the lever is broken.
Do you agree with that, Sonia?
I think there's something to it. I think it's interesting, for example, that both Dominic Cummings and then briefing from Inside Labour suggests, for example, that the civil service is an issue when politicians want to pull on levers and can sometimes get in the way. But I don't think it's the only reason by any means. I think there's a kind of more fundamental issue here, which is that politicians just haven't really got their heads around the fact that the UK is it's a bit of a midwit economy now. We've had living standards stagnant for the last 20 years. We've not seen the easy growth that we saw in the 2000s, which is what made it really easy for governments to take in tax revenue from the city and to spend it on better public services, on tax credits for working parents in low-income jobs, for example. We're not in that position. And the reason for that, I disagree with Fraser's analysis. I don't think leaving the EU, our closest trading partner, was a way forward for a country with a stagnant economy, because that actually puts up barriers for export-led businesses. But I think we've got a fundamental problem, which structural long-term issue with our economy, which is that levels of business investment have been too low for the last 40 years. No government of either colour has fixed that. They've all got their own ideas about what might, but the truth of it is that none of them have. And at the moment, we are staring down the face of a stagnant economy. It's not really clear where the growth will come from. An ageing population, which means that actually young people in their teens today will have to be paying even more tax just to keep public services where they are, let alone make them better, because we are going to have more older relatives who will be reliant on the NHS, who will need social care, for example. And literally no politician seems able to grasp this by the horns, to be honest with the country. We didn't see honesty in the Leave campaign. They just said, leave the EU and it will fix everything. Labour said, vote for us and it'll all be brilliant. The economy will get better. No real mainstream politician has been willing to say, look, actually as a country we're in a bit of a tough bind now. There aren't easy solutions like there were in the 2000s. There are tough trade-offs. If you want better public services, you are going to have to pay for them. There aren't magic bullets, and that is what opens the door to populism and populist politicians like Reform. And when politicians make promises that they can't deliver on, that further undermines people's trust in mainstream politics. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're stuck in a bit of doom loop of politics politicians, whether it's Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer, making sometimes well-meaning promises, but promises they can't possibly deliver on in government, and then people quite rightfully saying, well, you promised us something and you didn't give it to us, and now we're going to look elsewhere. So I think it is a bit depressing, to be honest.
Look, I think you're both excuse me, I think you're both right, but I also think it's not really the point. I don't think it's why this happens. I think the reason why parties are so quick to turn on their leaders these days and get rid of them, and why they get cheered on for doing so by the press and often quite a lot of the public, although I think the public actually gets a bit more annoyed by this, is just that we've lost sight of how incredibly damaging it is to have this kind of churn. We've lost sight of how incredibly unusual it is to throw prime ministers out the window. No?
I totally disagree with you. The reason why the Labour Party is turning behind the scenes on Keir Starmer is he's not a good prime minister. He really, really isn't. And that's really problematic for the country too. Like, you know, do we want the next three? And I would absolutely say that of the Conservatives as well. I think it's been a long time since we've had
that
speaks to how difficult
Sonia,
the job is. But it isn't. Labour MPs do not want all this drama.
Sonia, forgive me. That's half. I mean, his failure as a prime minister is only half the question, and a really important other half of the question should be, if we do this, will anything be better? Because you can't just do it on a sort of moral high horse, go, well, he's bad, he's got to go. You've got to be able to say, there will be a future under X, under Angela Rayner, under Wes Streeting. That will be better. Not only we will win more votes, but the country will be in a better state. And it just seems to me that's just an impossible calculation to make at the moment. Fraser?
Well, of course, the great dream is that the Tories got Boris Johnson after Theresa May, and look at that. He went on to win a landslide majority. They got John Major after Margaret Thatcher. Look at the 92 election. There have been instances where changing the leader has worked. Now, by the way, there have been a lot more where it doesn't work. But in both of those cases, you had a plausible alternative. Now, Hugo, I think you're completely right to say that the idea of this, things are bad, let's get rid of X, is a really dumb equation, because it's always a choice. You've got to say Y is better than X. Now, if we had a fantastic Prime Minister waiting in the wings for Keir Starmer, if there was a really, really good alternative, then I can understand all this destabilisation of his positions. But right now, it seems that Labour MPs are just grasping half of the equation. Things are tough. Our leader is not great. Our leader isn't polling very well. Okay, so who's the alternative? Is it going to be Angela Rayner? And unless they can... So this Tina, there is no alternative, is the new best friend of the Prime Minister. For as long as there isn't an alternative, I think he's pretty safe.
Sonia, I'll let you come back on that briefly, because I don't want you to think we're ganging up on you.
No, that's right. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, that is why Keir Starmer is safer now, because there isn't an obvious alternative. And also, more importantly, there isn't an alternative obvious agenda worked out. So, you know, how would a Wes Streeting premiership differ from an Angela Rayner premiership? I don't think we know very much about that at all. And I would actually be surprised if the candidates involved know very much about that either. So, absolutely. But at the same time, Labour's got to do some of that thinking, because it would be disastrous for them to go into the next election with Keir Starmer. And at the end of the day, it's not good to have a Prime Minister in charge who doesn't really seem to have a worked up governing agenda. So, I agree that on a practical level, he is safe for a little while now, because we're basically in a phony war, and the left is kind of worried about the right taking over the party. The right is kind of worried about the left taking over if things get destabilised. So that is what is keeping Keir Starmer in post. But we mustn't get away from the fact that this isn't, Labour MPs or the media having like a self-indulgent, bit of political soap opera. There is a fundamental issue at stake here, which is that I think Labour didn't do its homework before it got into government.
Sure. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Oh, good, more football. Keir Starmer is calling on the Manchester United's co-owner Sir Jim Ratcliffe to apologise after saying Britain has been colonised by immigrants. He's also the founder of the Ineos chemical group, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. He told Sky News, you can't have an economy with 9 million people on benefits and huge levels of immigrants coming in. I mean, the UK has been colonised. It's costing us too much money. He also said that I think 12 million people have arrived here since 2020, which is in no way true at all. Fraser, what do you make of all this?
Well, the irony is here that the word is colonised. That is the outrageous word, which is being condemned for. And, it wouldn't surprise me if the world of football takes action against him, thinking, is he bringing the game into disrepute because he's done that? I mean, obviously that's absurd on so many levels. His company, Ineos, I suspect 1 in 5 of them are probably immigrants. It's been pointed out quite a lot how many of his football team's players are immigrants. But if you take the word aside, his overall point, there are too many people on welfare, that we're using immigration to cover it up, that is something which I think is an important and difficult point to make. So in a way, he has completely sabotaged his own point.
Well, you're basically saying he's right on vibes, even though every single fact and word he said is wrong.
No, on the contrary. What I'm saying is the facts he was saying, that there are too many people on welfare, immigration to be covering up, that is a fact, that is important. But to basically go on to, to get his figures wrong in immigration, but most importantly to use the word colonised, that is the toxic word. That is what's going to get him, quite rightly, denounced from, which is Rachel Reeves has done it, Keir Starmer is doing it. And now this is, this isn't a borderline question, this is out and out repugnant.
What do you think, Sonia?
I agree with Fraser. It's a really appalling sort of way to phrase it. Colonising is it's just a really grim word with very bad intonations. So, fine, politicians can call it out. Lots of people will say, well, this is what politicians ought to be doing. My slight worry is that I hope I'm wrong, but calling out and picking these fights with these businessmen who say these things, it's all very well and good as far as it goes, but it's not a substitute for kind of governing substance. And my worry is because there's lots of people saying at the moment Keir Starmer needs to move left, and my worry is that this is what he thinks that means, but what does it mean in terms of substance? That would be my question.
Okay. Fraser, you've just come back from Stockholm and you've made some observations. Tell us your observations.
Well, January was the first month for something like 7 years where nobody was shot dead in Sweden. Right. Now, this is a strange thing because you would think, is that a thing? Well, it actually has been in Sweden. They've been gripped by this kind of gang crisis for many, many years, but they're starting to get on top of it. The government's responded. They've got this very active Justice Secretary. The police are getting on top of it, and they're beginning to turn back the tide, which is really quite significant. So for many years, the problem of gang crime is getting worse if we didn't know how to respond, but now you can see things going in the other direction. So that's quite good.
Wow. Okay. And look, you said journalism's changing there a lot as well.
Yes, there's a paper which I now and again write for, Svensk Dagbladet, and there...
Say that again, please.
Svensk Dagbladet.
What does it mean?
SVD. Sweden's daily paper.
Oh, that's exciting.
It is the premier quality newspaper in Scandinavia. Right. Now, the thing is, we know the Washington Post has been in well-publicised difficulties. They've fired a whole bunch of foreign correspondents. They're in crisis. This has led to lots of obituaries written about journalism, but those obituaries are wrong. The Wall Street Journal is doing very well. The Times is doing very well. Their figures came out recently showing 7% increase and an all-time high in online subscriptions. And also SVD is doing incredibly well. I remember a couple of years ago their target was 100,000 sales. Then they thought, okay, let's get to 125,000 at the end of December. They hit that last June, 6 months ahead of schedule. So here is an example of journalism thriving if it's done properly. So these are actually incredibly good times for quality journalism, as long as you don't follow the clickbait algorithms down towards the grave. Now, when you do that, you trash your reputation. It's very hard to win it back if you lose sight of what your publication is for. But when we see well-edited, well-run publications, not just in Britain, but right around the world, things are not just good, but the best they've ever been. Not just for the Times, for the Journal, for New York Times, and for SVD, and for other papers as well. So journalism does have a future as long as you ignore the trolls.
That's completely fascinating. Sonia, I want to ask your views on the first Sweden part of that. Why do you think Sweden becomes such a sort of culture war battleground that it seems to be very, very important for people on the left of politics to say Sweden is a paradise and very, very important for people on the right of politics to say it's a hell zone? Why do you think that happens?
Well, I think that just kind of happens in general, really. People like to sort of look abroad for cases that fit sort of what they would like to see in their own country. I think the right do it. I think the left do it. I think they often kind of quite flatten international case studies, make them quite superficial and say, look, this is why this supports policy X that we want to do over here. I think you can learn a lot from looking abroad, but you have to do it in quite a nuanced way because there are so many different there's so many cultural differences, etc. So, but I think it's inevitable that people say, oh, look, country X proves my point for doing Y. quite often when you look at the detail, it's a bit more of a mixed picture.
All right, two more I want to squeeze in quickly while I've still got you. First up, let's talk about AI. There's been a wave of resignations in the AI industry, including 2 senior employees at OpenAI and Anthropic, who've left their roles over fears about the direction in which the company is headed. One of them, an Oxbridge grad, he was the head of Anthropic's Safeguards research team, and left saying, "The world is in peril." Fraser, how much should we read into this?
Well, this is the big question. I mean, we're seeing now and again these 2 things saying about AI. One is that it's going to take over the world. And my suspicions, by the way, has been that those are exaggerated. AI is trying to talk its own book.
I just can't get that frightened of chatbots.
Well, yeah, exactly. But then, of course, you could say that you and I don't see under the hood. Those who are seeing can see these computers teaching themselves, starting to lie to the programmer, starting to blackmail, etc. So pretty quickly, you can see a scenario, as described in everything from Stanley Kubrick's Space 2001, where the AI just turns against kind of humanity. Now, that's theoretically possible. I guess those resignations are saying, look, it's happening and we should worry about it. But my own suspicion is that it's not moving nearly as fast enough, and that we might end up with a big AI bust. Right now there's a little bit of a bubble, assuming that it's going to change the world. I'm not sure if the latest version of ChatGPT is such a game-changing version. As a user, I'm always struck by the kind of moronic aspects of AI. That it's not nearly as clever as it's led to believe. But, the problem is that as a layman, you've got absolutely no idea. I mean, who am I to say whether these concerns are overblown or not? They strike me as completely plausible, but even if they were true, what would you do about it? Are we to say that we're going to have a moratorium on tech development? Nobody's quite worked out how, if at all, if it's even... And say America regulates it, Britain regulates it, then you'll find that people move to Korea where they won't.
Sure.
So, is there anything we can do?
Sonia, no time to ask you about AI, because instead I want to ask you about...
I've actually got quite a lot to say about it.
Well, I can give you 20 seconds and we'll have to throw oat milk on the fire then.
My point would be that, I agree with Fraser that we don't know its full potential, but it comes with both huge risks and huge benefits. But at the end of the day, we've literally got no clue how to regulate this stuff. We don't even know how to regulate social media, for example, which is a much simpler technology, but which is hard to regulate. So I do think that there are real risks to it, but I'm not sure there is a lot we can do about them, to be honest.
Thank you for making that so quick. It means there is time for me to ask you about oat milk. Very quickly, listen to Nigel Farage.
So I'm in a smart hotel in London. I've got a cup of coffee. I want some milk. Let's have a look. We've got semi-skim. I don't like that. Oat milk, what on earth's that when it's at home? Almond milk. All I want's proper bloody milk, not left-wing options, proper milk. What's wrong with me asking for that?
Well, now the Supreme Court has ruled that plant-based drinks, including Oatly, cannot be called milk. Vindication, Fraser.
Spoken like a true Europhile by Nigel Farage. That's exactly what the EU ruled. America took the other way around, reckon people are smart enough to know almond milk comes from almonds. So I think perhaps Farage is showing his inner yearnings to get back to Brussels.
Sonia, how do you milk an almond?
Sorry?
How do you milk an almond?
Oh, well, quite. I think you mash it up, mix it with loads of water and add in loads of preservatives, from my limited knowledge of how you make almond-based drinks. Obviously this feels kind of a bit flippant around the edges, but there are really good reasons for these laws, and you don't want consumers duped. Maybe milk... Consumers are discerning enough to know the difference, but there are definitely cases where producers being extremely lax about what they call products can actually be actively misleading for consumers.
We've got to leave it there. Sonia, Sodha, Fraser Nelson, thank you very much indeed. I'm Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio.